And today we welcome Pierre ARTHUIS, which is who is a postdoc in TU Darmstadt, and he will talk to us about ab initio computation of thin and xenon charge densities.
Okay, thank you, Alec. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. So, as Alec was saying, I'll be talking about ab initio computation of thin and xenon charge densities, which is contrary to what the logos might make you think, something that I did during my previous postdoc at the University of Surrey, though I'm now in Darmstadt in Germany. So let's dive right in, shall we? So first, a quick reminder on ab initio methods. And first, come back to the nucleus as a system. As I'm sure you all know, the nucleus is a system that is characterized by a whole diversity of phenomena related to its ground state properties, be it mass, radii, excited state properties, vibrational rotational band, its decay mode with respect to the strong or the electroweak force, its reaction properties, being its scattering and fusion. And this ties in with the nucleus being a complex many body problem to tackle as well. It's a mesoscopic system, so apart from very light nuclei, you can't really work with few body methods in the first place. But at the same time, we don't have enough nucleons even at the level of the higher of the heavier nuclei to be able to use statistical physics methods. And so we have this importance of finite size effects that makes it a complex problem to tackle. And at the same time, and that is something that makes nuclear theory very different, for example, to what our colleagues in quantum chemistry have to face. We have various excitation modes that arise at similar energies. So we can't really pick up between the ones of them that we want to tackle. So we have to take care of everything at once. And this at the same time with a complex interaction that emerges from quantum chromodynamics that has a non-perturbative character. So as I was saying, we have a complex interactions that emerges from quantum chromodynamics that has a non-perturbative character, and in which, and once again, this is at variance with our colleagues in quantum chemistry, for example, we have to take into account 3, 4, 5 body forces, etc. in the first place. So all of this makes for nuclear theory to be quite a complex endeavor in the first place. But that doesn't mean people haven't done things over the past decades. And basically, you definitely know about the most used methods, that is shell model energy density functionals, that are very good at reproducing experimental data. The thing they lack, though, is some systematic way to improve the results. Once you notice discrepancies with the experiment, it's very much a trial and error game to try to get closer to what you can actually observe in nature. On the other side, we've had actually ab initio methods for quite a few decades now, but at first they were limited by their factorial or exponential scaling to the very beginning of the nuclear chart. But what happened, though, in the past 15 years is that ab initio expansion methods, scaling polynomially, were developed or reintroduced to nuclear physics, along with new Hamiltonians modeled through chiral effective field theory, new preprocessing methods of the Hamiltonian, the development of novel and hybrid approaches, etc. And all of this has lifted those restrictions that we had on ab initio method. So to go a bit more into the detail, as I was saying at first, so in the 80s, we had what we call exact ab initio methods, that is Green's function Monte Carlo, Nagor shell model, Falaev-Jakubowski, hyperspherical harmonics, and those scale exponentially or factorially with the number of particles, meaning that even when you use importance truncation with NCSM, for example, you're still very much restricted to the oxygen isotopic line and under that. But during the 2000s, people reintroduced or developed coupled cluster theory, Dyson self-consistent green function, in medium similarity renormalization group, and many-body perturbation theory. At first, using them on doubly closed shell nuclei, which of course are only a limited number of nuclei, but still able to go up to calcium nickels, for example. And the big game changer happened during the 10 past years with the extension of those previous methods to open shell nuclei with Bogoliubov coupled cluster, Gorkov self-consistent screening function, multi-referencing medium SRG, and Bogoliubov MBPT. Once again, you have a polynomial scaling, and now you're basically able to do singly open shell chains. And then even more recently, people have started using some kind of hybrid method that we could call ab initio shell model, basically using coupled cluster and medium SRG to derive effective interactions that are then used in shell model code. And with that, well, you can very much fill the gaps between your magic lines. So as you can see, as of 2020, with ab initio methods, you're able to compute pretty much every nuclei up to the nickel isotopic lines, and then some teens, a couple of nuclei in between. So that's for the reach of ab initio methods right now. But I've been talking a lot about their reach, but what is the concept behind ab initio method? How do they function? Well, the thing is, as always, you go back to just solving your A-body-Schrödinger equation with your A-body Weld function and your A-body Hamiltonian. But when you do it ab initio, you do it with a certain set of rules that you impose yourself. You treat your nucleons as structureless degrees of freedom that are all active in the full A-body Hilbert space. That means we don't have a concept of core versus valence space, for example. Use elementary interactions. What I mean by that is your Hamiltonian is has two-body, three-body components. You do not incorporate more collective degrees of freedom into your Hamiltonian. In the end, of course, you solve your A-body-Schrödinger equation, and you're able to make some estimate of your error. Because in ab initio is based the idea of having a systematic way to improve your results that ties behind these terms of expansion method, which is basically you expand order by order the solution of your Schrödinger equation. So how does it work in practice? Well, you have some modeling that goes into your Hamiltonian. You solve your Schrödinger equation, you obtain a set of observables that you can then compare with experimental data. And the discrepancies or lack thereof between your data and the experiment gives you some feedback on the modeling of your Hamiltonian, but on the assumptions that you've made solving your Schrödinger equation as well, for example. Of course, this doesn't come without questions related to the format of the Hamiltonian. It's linked to QCD. So as I was mentioning a bit before, the paradigm at the moment in the community is to use the Hamiltonian derived from chiral effective field theory. And then the question of the 3, 4, and up to 8 body forces. At the moment, calculations are done with 2 and 3 body forces. Ideally, you would have to go up to 8 body. And the question is, what do we miss by not being able to include those in the end? And questions related to the solving of the Schrödinger equation as well. So I already mentioned the question of the accuracy. Are methods that treat all nucleons independently in an active way in the full A-body Hilbert space really usable for nuclei up to A equals 300, or do we need some more effective approaches when moving towards heavier nuclei? So those are the questions that are related to this whole scheme in the first place. And finally, before diving into our actual results, I wanted to briefly showcase you a range of what people within the ab initio community are able to do at the moment in terms of systems and our observables. So of course, the first obvious quantity to look at is the ground state energy, the binding energy. So here what you have are results for the oxygen isotopic lines for a bunch of different ab initio methods. It's not really important to look at the difference between them, but all those calculations were done with the very same Hamiltonian in the first place, with the same interaction. And what is pretty reassuring here is that, as you can see, all points are pretty much grouped, which means that all those methods with their different expansion truncations, with their different assumptions, they give pretty consistent results. And that is really, really a sign that ab initio methods are sound in the first place. And especially what is interesting in that is they're always pretty much on top of these golden stars, which correspond to importance truncated no-Gaussian model, that is to to full diagonalization results, so to exact results. A nice feature as well when I'm talking about oxygen is that since we've started incorporating three-body forces in our description, we're nicely able to reproduce the neutron drip line for the oxygens, so that's nice. Then another observable, of course, are radii. So here you have not really radii, but actually the change in the value of the charge radius for the even calcium isotopes. This time it's a bit the opposite of the philosophy of the previous picture, meaning that all calculations were done with the same method, but with different Hamiltonians. The red line here is actually kind of the historical Hamiltonian of the community. That's the N10 400. And without going too much into the detail, you see that, okay, it goes pretty much through the experimental points here, isn't really able to reproduce calcium 42, 44, okay. But especially one thing it completely misses is this kink. When you go past calcium 48, you have a very sharp increase in the charge radius, and the N10 light was completely failing at reproducing that. So more recently, new Hamiltonians were introduced, N2 LSAT and the NN plus 3 and local. We'll come back to the two of them. And without going too much into the details, you can see already that they're doing a much better job at reproducing this kick. We're not quite there yet, but it's already much better. And the local non-local does even a pretty solid job here at the level of the lightest calcium isotopes. So basically, radii tend to be a bit hard to reproduce, but as you can see, with improvements that have been made in Hamiltonians, we are doing a way better job nowadays. Now for something a bit different, excitation spectrum. So here you have the excitation spectrum of fluoride 19 computed with valence space in medium SRG. That is this hybrid approach using medium SRG to derive effective interaction for shell model code. And here you can see, if you look at this blue band and compare with the experiment right at the direct right of it, that the valence space in medium SRG actually does a pretty good job at reproducing the experimental results. And especially if you then look at the gold standard USDP shell model interaction, you can even argue that the VS IMSRG does a better job at reproducing fluorine 19 than the shell model, which of course doesn't happen all the times, but it's really a sign that for certain systems, in certain sets, in certain areas of the nuclear chart, nowadays that's not really that much difference as one might think between shell model and ab initio results in terms of reproducing the experiment. And finally, and that will be the topic of today's talk, another thing that we can look at are density distributions. So that plot is taken from a paper from the Sackley group a couple of years ago, where you can see that they reproduced the experimental charge density for sulfur 36, computed the proton density as well. And at the same time that they were predicting experimental results, they were predicting a bubble nucleus for silicon 34 by looking here as well at the charge density distribution. So as you can see, even for things that might seem a bit trickier to reproduce, actually, with a good choice of method and interaction, you're really able to be pretty much on top of the experimental results. So that was for kind of a broad panorama of what people are doing in the ab initio community. And now let's dive into our tin and xenon results. So the idea at the time was for us to try to do something at what was considered the frontier of the ab initio mass domain. That was the present day limits, or let's say the present day limits in 2019. We had first proof of principle calculations with couple cluster on T100, T132, but those weren't really experimentally relevant. And more recently, in 2018, with valence space in medium SRG, the first really experimentally accurate result on the lower end of the tin isotopic chain from tin 100 to tin 110. So the tin isotopic line was very much the limit of what people were able to do. So we are thinking, okay, if we want to go as far, if not further than that, what should we use in terms of method? Well, if you are working with such heavy nuclei, you want to limit the computational cost, and usually a good way to do this is to stick to single reference method. The thing though is when you work towards heavier nuclei, you have less and less double closed shell ones, which means that if you stick to single reference method, the only way to be able to tackle all nuclei is to work with symmetry breaking ones. And of course, you want a method that is relatively versatile in its access to observables. So in our case, the choice went to self-consistent screening function, which are methods that were co-developed in Sackley and Surrey over the past decade. So that's for the method. And now the question is the one of the Hamiltonian, the interaction. If you go far in mass, that means you probably have some issues with model space convergence. So you need Hamiltonians that are good at converging and that have been tested as much as possible on medium mass nuclei, and that already showed good reproduction there, hoping that this would extend to heavier nuclei. So in our case, this was N2LOSAT, which is an interaction that has been that has had a huge success in the community over the past few years, that has really proved pretty good at reproducing, especially radii, for example, and the NN+3 and local non-local, which was a newly proposed Hamiltonian at the time that we wanted to test alongside N2LOSAT in this endeavor. And then the constraint that we had were that, well, if you want to go further than tin, that is fine, but probably you don't want to go too far either to still have good chances to converge everything. And because our method is symmetry breaking, but only breaks the particle number symmetry, that means we can't do deformed nuclei, so we have to stick to spherical or near spherical nuclei. If the deformation is very low, then that shouldn't be a problem, but we are not able to tackle, to qualitatively reproduce deformed nuclei with self-consistent screening function at the moment. So the goals we fixed ourselves were, well, the double closed shell milestones in this area, so tin 100, tin 132, and xenon 132, 36, 38, which are open shell nuclei of experimental interest, for example, in SCRIT in Japan. So that's what we try to tackle. So a very short crash course into self-consistent Green function, just to give you an idea of what it is. The idea behind this method is to recast the solution of the Schrödinger equation as a set of 1 to a-body Green's function. And of specific interest to us is the one-body Green's function, because just with that, you're able to access a whole bunch of things. That is ground state energy, other one-body observables like radii, densities, the spectroscopy of neighboring nuclei, A plus or minus one-body systems, which is a specificity of Green's function. And you can do other interesting things as well, for example, elastic nuclear scattering. So that's the idea. And then how do you proceed? Well, you solve your Dyson in the self-symmetry conserving case, or Gorkov in the symmetry breaking case equation self-consistently, and you obtain an infinite diagram series resummation. That sounds pretty frightening, but if we just look at the equation and how it looks diagrammatically, you have your correlated one-body Green's function. So that is the very thing that you're trying to compute. And it is nothing but the uncorrelated one-body Green's function summed to this object, that is the self-energy contracted with the uncorrelated and the correlated one-body Green's function. So basically, in this self-energy, you have a whole bunch of diagrams. That is this infinite diagram series that you will truncate at a certain order. And then you solve this equation a certain number of times until your correlated propagator has converged. And how we do it? Well, we use this this thing called algebraic diagrammatic construct at order n scheme, which basically tells you how do you truncate this object in the first place. So basically what you do at order n is you compute every single many-body perturbation theory diagram up to order n, plus all necessary diagrams to maintain the spectral properties of your self-energy. Of course, if you go up to infinite order, which you can't do in practice, this would give you exact result, because then you're exactly solving the Schrödinger equation. In practice, numerically, we have a code that is able to go up to ADC3 in the symmetry conserving case, that is for doubly closed shell nuclei, and ADC2 for the symmetry breaking open shell case. So how does it look when we actually compute stuff? Well, we did our calculation in an harmonic oscillator basis, truncated at n max 11 or 13. So that's the size of your model space. And one particularly important thing is that one of the issues that we have with ab initio method are the three-body matrix element. Ideally, once you've set your n-max truncation on your model space, if you do not want to impose another cut, you have to take E3 max. So that is the value, the energy up to which you take into account three-body matrix element, up to 3 times n max. The thing is that's not feasible in terms of storing at the moment. So in our case, we had to stick to E3 max 1416, which was the state of the art 2 years ago. So we did some first exploratory calculation on Xenon 132 with the N12 we found our variation minimum for an harmonic oscillator frequency between 10 and 16 MeV. That's nice, except we realized that we could not converge the ground state energy with respect to the model space. So that's, of course, not really good. So the question was, can we look at something else than the ground state energy then and say something meaningful? So we had a look at the convergence behavior of the radius. So here, for example, you have the charge radius of Xenon 132 as a function of the harmonic oscillator frequency. And if you stick to solid lines for now, what you have in blue is the nmax 11 curve, and in yellow is the nmax 13 curve. So what you can very much guess from the behavior that is shown here is that when you increase in max, because in the end, when your results are converged, they should not depend on the harmonic oscillator frequency anymore. The lines become flatter and flatter. And especially some interesting thing that we know from experience in the community is that the lines becomes flatter and flatter, but with a pattern where basically the lines kinds of pivots around the crossing point. So we could expect the charge radius to be somewhere around this crossing points between the line here. So that's for the max behavior. And then we thought, okay, how does it look if we have a more severe truncation on the three-body matrix element? Does it changes the picture a lot or not? Because we're not sure for such large nuclei how it plays a role into the convergence. So those are the dashed lines here. And what is reassuring is that even though the dashed lines tend to give you smaller values than the solid lines, you see that the crossing point is pretty much at the same level in the two cases. So it probably doesn't play that much of a role. So, okay, we thought, okay, let's be conservative. Then we will take pretty large error bands and we will say that our radius is somewhere between the lowest value at h bar omega 14 and the highest value at h bar omega 10. Those are pretty large error bars, but that way we are sure that we are not doing anything too crazy. And so that's what we realized at the time, and we were pretty happy because we said, okay, that means it's probably possible to extract our radii despite not being completely converged with respect to the modeled space size. At the same time, we look into convergence with respect to our many-body method, so to the ADC scheme, not in Xenon 132, but in the TINA isotopes, where we can go up to ADC3. And basically, the changes there are included within the error bars. So going from ADC2 to ADC3 doesn't change the radius that much, which is consistent with what had been observed previously on lighter nuclei. So that was our realization. And then we thought, okay, then can we look at the charge density distribution? So here what you have is the charge density distribution, once again, of Xenon 132. So this huge green band here comes from the different calculations that we included, that we took. We took basically the same thing as in the previous plot. So calculations at h bar omega 10, 12, 14, we take all of them, and that gives us a pretty conservative estimate of where the true charge density should be. So first thing that we are pretty happy with is that our radius as obtained with the N2LSAT is consistent with the error bars with the value obtained experimentally in Riken. We have a slightly larger value, but nothing too crazy. We compared with our other Hamiltonian, the local non-local, and this one completely underpredicts, severely underpredicts our radius. So we have a way smaller value here. So we thought, okay, for the densities, let's keep going with the N2LSAT. And another interesting thing is if you look at, okay, the surface behavior is, yes, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but this two-point Fermi distribution that you see here, so the dotted line and the gray arrow bands, is the two-point Fermi distribution that was extracted at Riken. So as you can see, we have a similar surface behavior, though we have a slightly larger nuclei, slightly larger radius, and we have a similar maximal density. The thing, though, is that from the very nature of a two-point Fermi density, well, we can't really say much about what happened inside the nucleus. Well, we have this kind of wiggly behavior with a slight depletion at the center coming from our calculation, but we can't discriminate with the experiment. We would need the experiment to reach higher luminosity and be able to to extract a 3 or 4 point distribution to really be able to say more. But that's not a problem. That already means that we have something that is not too crazy. And then we thought, okay, if we have the charge density distribution, can we actually reproduce the experimental data? So we looked at it, and what you see here is the luminosity times the differential cross-section obtained at Riken as a function of the effective momentum transfer. So let's stick to the bottom half of the plot for the moment. You see 3 colored bands. Those correspond to our end-to-end calculations for the 3 different values of the scattering energies that were used at SCRIT. You have plot markers that correspond 3 types of plot markers corresponding once again to the 3 different values of the energies, and 3 gray bands which correspond to the results with the 2-point Fermi density that were extracted at SCRIT as well. So what is very striking from the start here is that apart from this area between 0.8 and let's say 1.1 inverse Fermi, well, we are pretty much on top of the SCRIT experimental results. Pretty much on top of it, and with not so crazy error bars. Our bands are not that large, so this really makes sense. And then when we are slightly over predicting the cross section, we're not that far either. So that's some quite good news. On the other side, we thought, okay, let's look at what will happen if we did the same calculations with the local and non-local Hamiltonian, which under-predicts the radius. So here what you have are shifted upwards the very same experimental results from SCRIT and shifted upwards with the same shift, of course, or local and non-local results. And as you can see here, the calculation completely fails at reproducing the experimental data. So this really shows the importance of having accurate Hamiltonians for description of nuclei. You see that those are the very same ab initio methods being used and giving you very different results just from the difference between the 2 Hamiltonians. We were able to reproduce the SCRIT experimental results, highlighting the limitations of the experiment in terms of luminosity in the sense, and which I found particularly interesting from a researcher point of view, is this shows that somehow even unconverged results can be of interest sometimes. If you have a way to extract error bars that are meaningful, even if they are conservative, well, sometimes you happen to be lucky, and this is sufficient to say meaningful physical stuff. So from the experimental results, we then move to charge radii. So here you have four sets of nuclei, so Tin100, Tin132, and our 3 xenons, 132, 36, 38. You have our end-to-end error bars, and here the experimental values extracted from the nuclear data tables. And what you can see from the get-go is that we have a pretty good reproduction of the experimental values with end-to-end SAT. The xenon experimental values are within our error bars, even though they tend to be slightly on the lower end of them. We are slightly over-predicting with the case of Tin132, but we are not that far either. And then we had some first prediction of the Tin100 charge radius. I do not show them here, but as you can expect, the local and non-local severely underpredicts all of those nuclei. And this is a pretty nice table because it really shows that end-to-end SAT is a meaningful Hamiltonian for use in the heavy mass regime, or let's say what in ab initio we consider to be the heavy mass regime, which is around the tin isotopic line. So that's really good news. So another thing we looked at then, since we had the radii, were the neutron skins. So here you have them for this time for N2LSAT and for the local non-local, and you'll see why I bring back the local non-local in a bit. So those, if you look at the values, those two Hamiltonian yield compatible neutron skins within their fairly large error bars, but they're not completely incompatible between the two of them. The N2LSAT tends to yield smaller neutron skins, which is not really a surprise because this Hamiltonian is known to have issue at reproducing the symmetry energy of nuclear matter in the first place. On the other side, the local non-local yields more reasonable neutron skins, but as we were discussing before, it does a bad job at giving you the charge radius. So as you can see here, we always have some trade-off in the Hamiltonian between the observables that we want to reproduce. And another nice thing is that a few months after this study, colleagues from Triumph and Darmstadt published a paper with first converged calculation on tin 132 using admission method as well, in that case minus RG, and they predict neutron skin of 0.22, which lies pretty much in the middle of our local non-local prediction. So you see that we are not doing anything too crazy here. Okay, those were our results on tin xenon isotopes, and now I want to use the time, the few minutes I have left, to try to give some perspective on going towards even heavier nuclei. And what, in the first place, what are the limitations that we face in the ab initio community right now on the structure side of things? Well, one of the first issues, which I discussed in the previous slides, is tied to the nuclear interaction accuracy. The old N10 Mach-Light, for example, chiral potentials were known to largely overbind min-mass nuclei. As I've discussed, some progress has been made, but we still typically have some trade-off between reproducing the energy, reproducing the radii, and reproducing nuclear matter properties. And there aren't really Hamiltonians that are able to nail the three quantities at once now. And at the moment, at least, the interactions are what drive the total uncertainty of our results within the ab initio community. Another issue that we face is linked to the many-body method truncation. So as I was telling you, we have this expansion method. So you expand your Schrödinger, the solution of your Schrödinger equation into a set of contributions. And the more you incorporate, the closer you are to the exact result. The thing is, of course, if you want to go to higher order, to incorporate more of those contributions, well, you have more and more, and usually this growth is not linear. And you have more and more, and especially you start having more and more diagrams where you have three-body forces contributing. And ideally, even though we are not there yet, you would take into account diagram with higher body forces as well. So this means an increased cost in terms of development. You have more contributions that you need to code, that you need to test, to benchmark, and in the end, an increased computational cost because you have more contribution, and each of those individual contributions actually costs more time. So all of this is preventing us to go towards higher order, higher precision method right now. And a final thing, our model space has limitations. So once again, as I discussed briefly, the storage of the three-body force is really something that we are struggling with at the moment. It's too costly to fully incorporate it. Another issue is the storage cost of the many-body tensors, so the operators that you have to compute during your calculations. And because those scale depending on the order of your truncation, that is one of the things that prevents us as well to going towards higher order methods. And the thing is, in the end, the model space size is what fixes your computational time. So this plays a role not only in the storage, but in the computational time as well. So now I want really just to flash very briefly some ideas that people are starting I've started to work on in the community. I'm by no means exhaustive in the name of people I'll be citing, but it's just to show you that really the community is active at trying to tackle those issues. So in the case of nuclear interaction, what I've started to mention newer Hamiltonians with newer strategies for fits being developed. Another huge thing recently is people are starting incorporating the delta isobar in the chiral EFT description, additionally to the pion and nucleon degrees of freedom. People have started looking more thoroughly in the uncertainties linked to our interactions as well, to be able to gauge where we have progress to made in our fitting methods, etc. Then in terms of the many-body truncation, as I was saying, you have more and more diagrams that you need to take into account. And actually, I've been working with other people into designing an automated expression generator that is a code that just gives you the expression you need to compute at a certain order, such that you don't have to derive everything by hand. Other people, namely Christian Drischler, have already developed systems for which you generate automatically your code. So you give this specific code the expressions that you have to implement, and it spits out, for example, the C++ code that you need for your calculation. Other people are trying to work on assessing the importance of the different contribution at each order to see if we cannot go towards some kind of middle ground expansion method, incorporating only the most important contribution at a new order to keep the computational cost as low as possible, whilst increasing the accuracy of our method. And in terms of the model space size, people are trying with different things. A better normal ordering method, the use of natural orbitals that improve your convergence with respect to model space size, importance truncation method that allow you to reduce the number of matrix elements that you have to take into account. And another thing that wants to focus on, and that is a direction that has been opened by Alexander Tischai, with a member of my group at Technische Universität Darmstadt, is the tensor factorization / decomposition. And so I want to discuss briefly on just 2 slides this thing that we've done in a paper led by Alex and published this year, which is reducing the interaction storage with singular value decomposition. So as I was saying, the matrix element storage is a huge problem for us right now. It's sizable but manageable for the two-body part, but the big issue is that the three-body terms which constitute what limits our ab initio mass range at the moment. So the question for us was, okay, can we do something about it? And we wanted to first do some kind of proof of principle calculation at the two-body level in the first place. So the idea is that, okay, you have your interaction V. It's a nice n by n matrix. And using a singular value decomposition, you rewrite this as a product of 3 matrices, left and right matrices, and in the middle you have this sigma matrix, which is actually a diagonal matrix. And the idea is that in sigma, the diagonal elements are what we call the eigenvalue of your first matrix V, and those eigenvalues are ordered depending on their magnitude. Each eigenvalue coding for one contribution, in a sense, giving you the magnitude in the sense of one specific contribution to the overall interaction. And why is it interesting to have all of this ordered as a function of the magnitude is because, Well, if you look at a chiral two-body interaction, you'll see that kind of independently of the partial wave you look at, you have this same behavior of a very rapid fall of the singular values. So their magnitude decrease pretty rapidly. We have a logarithmic scale here. So then you might think, okay, what happens if I only keep the largest values and only take, let's say, the five first ones and discard all the rest? Well, if you do this truncation on singular values, then you only have a very small sigma tilde diagonal matrix with just your, let's say, five singular values, 5 here being what we call the rank of our matrix. And for the left and right matrices, well, you keep only the columns / rows that are associated to the singular values. So here you've replaced your n times n storage requirement by the rank plus 2 times the rank times n. So if you can take a rank that is small enough, you can gain a huge compression factor in the first place. So okay, that's the idea, but does it work in practice? Is doing this truncation and keeping only a small portion of the data in the first place sufficient to reproduce results? Sorry. Well, we tested that in symmetric nuclear matter and finite nuclei. And what you can see, so here you have symmetric, the binding energy per particle for symmetric nuclear matter at the Arthur-Focken second order perturbation theory levels. And what you see are in black the exact results, and then the color lines correspond to rank 1, rank 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in the case of rank 1, for example, that means we only keep one singular value. So we have only one value in the sigma tilde matrix, and then we have one column and one row in the left and right matrices. And this is truncating from 100 times 100 matrix in the first place. So with only 1% of the information in the first place, you see that we are already not that far away. And then you see that very rapidly we have an increase in accuracy, and basically at rank 5 we're already nailing the exact results. And you might think, okay, but that's symmetric matter, it's maybe not that hard to reproduce. How does this go when you move to finite nuclei? Well, the thing is, we have as good results, I would say. So here you have a selection of doubly closed chain nuclei computed with IMSRG2, which is the ab initio workhorse method of the group. And once again, you see that order by order you improve, and very rapidly you fall back on the exact result. So basically, in the end, we have 99% accuracy with only 5% of the data being stored, with a systematic convergence with respect to the rank. And what is especially interesting in the finite nuclei case is that the quality of the reproduction is independent of the mass number. So we can expect this to track to heavier nuclei, where gains in storage are even more important. So what this means is, if we're able to extend that to through body forces, in the end, storage costs could possibly not be a bottleneck anymore in a matter of just a few years. So that's really exciting for us. So now moving to my conclusion, just to summarize what I've been talking about. I've showed you the tremendous progress of ab initio methods that are now able to reach up to A equals 100 roughly. With the limitation in the mass range being lifted through numerical developments, limitation in accuracy being lifted through better interaction fits. I've showed you calculation that the current ab initio frontier, showing that even unconverged calculation can prove helpful for heavy nuclei. that ab initio is already fit for comparison with experiment in this mass domain, actually. And I've briefly mentioned results from our colleagues in Triumph and Darmstadt with converged calculation for T132. And finally, in terms of the future ab initio many-body methods, the interplay between the choice of reference state, of model space, of numerical methods will be increasingly important, with very probably more sophisticated method that would be developed relying at least partially on some automation level, and probably a split between the method that we use, between cheap methods that will be used for large-scale studies, and costlier, more precise method for really targeted studies. And I want to leave you actually with some perspective and outlook on what the community has been doing. So I've been discussing during this talk our results on neutron-rich xenon and tin isotopes. I've mentioned converged Tin132 results by colleagues, but very recently, in the past 2 weeks, colleagues notably in Triumph, SCRIT, and Chalmers, I've gotten out a new paper with ab initio estimation of the lead 208 neutron skin. Over the years, colleagues of different groups have published some massive study of predicting the masses of up to 700 nuclei in the lower part of the nuclear chart. So what you can see is really the ab initio methods are not as restricted to a narrow region as some might think anymore. With the standard mass range of our calculation to be extended to the tin isotopic line pretty soon, with exploratory studies up to lead isotopes that are not feasible. And we really have a variety of methods for a variety of systems, with them doubly closed shell, doubly open shell, depending on the observables that you want to tackle. There's probably some ab initio method that is able to tackle that right now. And especially in terms of observables, people are always extending the method to tackle new things: electric dipole polarizability, beta decay studies, BRV2s for doubly open shell nuclei. So really the field is moving quite quickly and expanding its abilities very fast, and that's quite an interesting time that we are living in. So with that, thank you all for your attention. I want to thank the members of my group in Darmstadt and all past and previous collaborators. Thank you.